Serious, nurses and doctors of Reddit, what's your weirdest, scariest paranormal stories that took place during work? A ward I worked on once had a patient who was a psychic medium as a patient. We had a bit of a laugh with her as she was on the ward for a while. She'd had a stroke which affected her mobility, and she would do readings for the staff etc from time to time. I took it all as just a bit of fun until one evening when she pressed her nurse call buzzer and told us to go check on a patient in a side room as he was dead. We went to check and sure enough found that the gentleman had died. Later on we asked our psychic patient how she had known and she told us she had seen him coming out of his room obviously distressed. She realized he had died and had to explain to him what had happened and help him to pass over. Go to the light. Now I am not a believer, but that gave me the creeps. I worked in a pediatric hospital and had always heard that the 4th floor right outside our oncology unit was haunted. I worked 312s normally but would pick up overtime and picked up a night shift. I was working in the NICU, which happened to also be on the 4th floor but on the opposite side. The oncology unit had a staircase that was a shortcut down to the cafeteria, which was on the 2nd floor. At about 3 AM I was ready to take a short break and wanted a cup of coffee from the cafeteria, so I decided to take that staircase. I walked through the automatic double doors and saw a kid skipping down the hall. I called out to him as I was afraid a little kid had snuck out of a patient room. As soon as I called out to him, he turned and in the blink of an eye totally vanished. A lot of other nurses and docs had seen the same little kid skipping in that same hallway. Of course I chalked it up to just exhaustion and didn't really think about it much after that. But you are damn sure I didn't use that hallway at night ever again. I used to work in a nursing home as both a CNA and an LPN. And while nothing too crazy happened, there were definitely things that happened out of the ordinary. I remember one time after someone had died, I was cleaning up her body and the door to the room swung wide open even though it had been firmly latched. Nobody was there. It gave me the creeps. There were instances of furniture being moved, lights turning on and off by themselves, and toilets randomly flushing by themselves as well. I also remember I had one resident one night who asked me to make sure I closed the door to the closet that was at the end of her bed, and she told me that when it was open that woman kept going in and out of it all night and it kept her awake. When I worked at the funeral home, I was told a story about an elderly lady that had died. The husband said he wanted her to be buried with her ring as she never took it off. My co-worker was in the morgue and was washing the body. She removed the ring to mark it down on the paperwork. As soon as she did, a styrofoam head they used for wigs went flying across the room. She just said out loud, all right, I'll put your ring back on, no more disturbances." Worked in a nursing home long-term facility for multiple years. Personally hadn't experienced anything too crazy apart from mystery call lights, call bell system going off, no buttons lit up, no rooms lit up. System would have to be reset from the electrical room to clear it. Hearing doors close shut, toilets flushing, faucets running. These were by no means commonplace. Other staff had some more direct experiences though. Apparently in one hall a little girl would occasionally be seen walking. This had been reported by multiple staff as well as patients. A staff member was sitting out in her car during night shift when some woman who knocked on her window and quickly disappeared. The next day she was discussing this out loud with the oncoming shift when someone pulled out a picture from old files based on the description provided. Apparently, it was a match to a former patient that had passed away at least 10 years before that staff member was hired. My mom worked at a hospital in our town that shut down around 15 years ago. They were having a sort of farewell party with all the staff. She, my sister and I took a walk around at the end to take a last look. We went to the 4th floor and were the only people up there. Small hospital, easy to tell. As we're walking down the hallway, we hear footsteps that sounded like men's dress shoes walking next to us, louder and different than all our sneakers. When we stopped, the footsteps kept going down the hall. Once they got down the hall, the emergency light and alarm over the room started sounding. My mom went over and couldn't turn it off because the system was disconnected, turned off. I think she tried really hard to keep it together for us because all she said was HMM, that's weird, this whole system is already off. But I do remember us snoping to the elevator right after that. When we got in the elevator, the button for the ground floor was pushed already. Easy to explain away as some other kid pushing all the buttons, but still weird given the circumstances. There is probably some medical explanation for this. but still the weirdest thing I've seen as a nurse so far. We had a very robust, confused old lady on our floor. Her room was in front of the nurse's station so we could keep an eye on her, and had one of our nurse's aides as a sitter too. She was always fighting, kicking, trying to get out of bed, very restless and agitated, as some patients I've had before can get before death. One day we were called into the room as her heart rate was going down and she lay still with her eyes open. It was 30.20 then flatlined. We checked for a pulse and did not find any. She was a DNR so we did not attempt resuscitation. We close her eyes, prepare to get the body back and call the family. The sitter remains in there to start getting the body ready. Less than 10 minutes later she calls us back in. The old lady is at it again, hitting, kicking, trying to get out of the bed. She came back to life. Honestly, we found the situation hilarious, and I still have never seen any patient come back like that on their own. I think she made it out of the hospital too. I'm a nurse. I've witnessed quite a lot with Alzheimer people. They often develop their own scenarios in their own head, often accompanied by vivid hallucinations. Once during night shift, I heard a woman scream in fear. Checking on her, she managed to climb into her wheelchair in pure panic, wanting to flee her bedroom, asking what was wrong. She thought the building was on fire. Now what's important to mention here is, people often make claims that people are just crazy or dreaming badly or something, but this is not the case. People with hallucinations have been found to actually see, hear, smell, etc. something when their hallucinations occur, as the same locations in the brain are stimulated as if they would get real impulses. That woman actually saw fire. She actually smelled fire. She didn't just make that up to be crazy. It's what her brain told her was happening, and she was in real panic for her life. And the same applies to when those people see someone else in their room. When they want me to guide someone out of the bedroom who isn't actually there, seemingly standing right behind me, and it makes no sense to discuss with them that no one's there. To them, someone is there, and you better do your best effort of improvising to guide that someone, even if it's no one outside. Play along, and they'll be fine. This, to me, is the scariest thing at work. They see something you don't. Back when I was a paramedic in Oakland, I was taking care of an elderly gentleman in the back of my ambulance. He looked up into the upper corner of the ambulance and said, "It's okay Lulu, I'll be with you soon." His daughter was with him and told me that Lulu was his wife who died 20 years earlier. A few minutes later he went into cardiac arrest and passed on. I've worked in a small family-run nursing home for 6 years as a nurse aide. It was an orphanage before it became a nursing home, and unfortunately before being shut down the orphanage had a history of severe abuse and neglect. Unfortunately, it's not gossip, the owner herself has told us. When residents get close to death they always see a little girl. One of my patients, a very alert 102-year-old gentleman, he knew all our names and was very alert and oriented. I was passing dinner trays and saw that he had his back turned and was talking and laughing in the corner. I knocked and asked him who he was talking to. He chucked and said, "This little girl came into my room. She was scared." He died 3 days later. About 6 months later had a subacute patient screaming about a little girl grabbing his feet and she needed to leave him alone. He died that night. She's come up over the years, it's always the same thing. They see her and then they die. Other co-workers have had the same experience. It's very unsettling. I am a psychiatrist and during my training years I worked for 6 months at a ward treating patients with depressive and anxiety disorders. It was an old building who had been housing psychiatric patients since the mid-1920s. On our floor we had 13 beds and a nursing station, a living room, and a few conference rooms. One day a few weeks and I am interviewing a patient who, when asked about sleeping patterns, tells me she have heard a baby crying at night waking her up. There are no babies in that hospital as the place is situated far away from housing areas and there were restricted visiting hours. Afterwards the nurse pulls me aside and tells me that the baby crying thing is not a psychotic symptom. She is very serious about this, but won't elaborate. I kind of shrug it off, as either way it does not change the diagnostic or treatment, and forgets about the experience. Around 3 months in my stay I sit in the nurses station and 3 nurses behind me are talking. One of them says she is very active today and the other says, "Really? Oh, hadn't noticed." I turn around and ask them who they are talking about. They look at each other, and then one of them hesitantly says, "Well, There is a baby here. She cries sometimes. I of course says no, but they just kind of shrug and smiles. Not 30 seconds later I hear it. It sounded far away but not too far. A cry. Clearly a baby's cry, sounding like it is separated from us by maybe 2 or 3 walls. I am perplexed and look at the nurses. They look at me like told you so. I of course ask about this, but they can't say anything else but this faint baby cries there and have been there always. Since then I heard it maybe 2-3 times a week. I told a new doctor about it who laughed. However, a few weeks in her stay, she came to me, white as a sheet, and told me she heard it in their coffee break. All the nurses just kind of knew about it, and being in psychiatry, hearing that kind of stuff is not really something you brag about. I was transferred and haven't heard it since. I think about it sometimes, but I don't really know what to make of it. Okay, I am a nurse but this did not happen to me, but several other nurses who worked at these units. There is a little girl who haunts the burn unit of a large military medical treatment facility in the US. She has been seen by both staff and patients. Haunts may not be the correct term, but she has been witnessed by several. Second, I used to work at the old Walter Reed Army Medical Center. In the old one that moved back in 2011, there was a VIP ward. I believe it was Ward 72. Any retired general officers would be stay there, along with any higher ups in the Gov. Think Secretary of State and other cabinet officials. There was also a room for the First Lady and President. This ward is private, locked at all entrances and very nice. It is furnished with very high-end furniture and a lot of it was donated by MRS, Mamie Eisenhower, the wife of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Well, per my friend who worked there, the ghost of Mamie Eisenhower is very particular about anyone staying in her room. And if anyone did sleep in that room, she would yank off the bed sheets. My friends also said decorative pieces would randomly fall off table or fly off the walls when they were the only ones up there. Mamie would also apparently page the supervisor, who would call the ward back to a very confused nurse as to who paged them. I worked as a med tech at an assisted living facility. One day a resident, I'll call her Margaret, suddenly passed away and her family left all her belongings in the room that night including her pendant to call the staff for help. The next night Margaret's neighbor called the staff because someone was talking in the room next door and keeping them awake. We brushed the resident off knowing that Margaret's room was empty. About an hour later Margaret's pendant started going off from her empty apartment. I was the only one willing to go turn it off, so I walked into the room and it was freezing cold in the middle of summer. The air conditioning was off. Suddenly the bathroom door slammed as I was turning off the pendant light. I locked the door and ran back to the nurse's station. We forced one of the older male staff members to go check out the entire room and he claims the door was still locked when he got down there and no one was in there. One day a patient had to go to the X-ray which he was taken to in a wheelchair. About 5 minutes later the notification from the patient's room went off and me and my favorite work buddy went to the room. As we stepped in we saw that the room was empty and the windows were closed. Even the bed was missing in which the patient did not go to the X-ray. We both told a fully examined nurse and even she had no idea where the bed went. At the end we had to fill the room with another bed. I'm still a nursing student but this was the most paranormal thing I witnessed so far. I am a labor and delivery nursery nurse. Mostly it's call lights alarming from rooms that are completely empty. Sometimes it would coincide with a PX the time of death on another unit, or be the anniversary of a fetal demise. However, my creepiest, we have a button to push after a delivery to play a lullaby over the PA system announcing a birth through the hospital. One night no one was even in the same room as the button and the lullaby started playing. It did that twice, then we unplugged the entire thing. It still went off once more that night, and again a few days later despite being entirely disconnected. That was a few years ago and no one ever heard it do that before or since. One of the rooms we have is obviously having something of a haunting. A man in a gown gestured one of the techs to come in. She went in and he was gone. 1 week earlier a female PT was asking to get a different room, because a man wouldn't leave her room. We just thought it was some sort of delirium. Multiple others have seen him too.